Brad, why did you feel it was the right time to come back and coach?
Well, it is a good question, and initially the answer was I didn't. I was really pleased doing what I was doing and learning a lot in a different role. But ultimately, I love working with players, and the thing I love most about coaching is getting the best out of players and taking them from where they currently are and improving them, not just as footballers, but also as people. And 3 years out of the game, I realised that that's what I miss most about coaching. And while I loved my previous role, just didn't have that element of developing young people.
Was there a moment that you thought, yep?
Yeah, the moment that I explicitly decided, I'm going to commit to this process is, there were a whole lot of things in the lead up, but probably the tipping point was that the club and everyone associated with the club talked about refocusing on football. And Essendon's had a lot of priorities over the last probably couple of decades and a lot of things to deal with, and the club really felt that now was the time to refocus on football and potentially, they'd focused on other areas, commercial and those sorts of areas, which are really important. But there was the 100% commitment to focusing on football that excited me, and having the resources and support to be able to invest in our players and develop them was something that was too good to pass up.
Have you got a sense of how big the Essendon Football Club is?
Yeah, I do, and I do from lots of different sides of the fence. But as an opposition player, many years ago, regardless of, Brisbane were experiencing some success in the early 2000s, but at the Gabba when Brisbane played Essendon, there were almost as many Essendon supporters as there were Brisbane, and that's evident wherever you go in the country. So we've got a lot of passionate members, but just a huge supporter base nationally, which is, I think, really exciting for us. But again, we've got to hold up our end of the bargain and work really hard on getting footy back to where it needs to be.
And the sense of impatience too that there is with Essendon fans, have you felt that yet or not?
No, I think that exists everywhere, and it might be to various degrees at different clubs. But I mean, ultimately at every club, people just want to win every game they play, and over time, if you're not winning, that compounds into long periods of time without success. But the competition's structured in such a way now that it's very difficult to stay at the top. There are only probably one or maybe a couple of notable clubs who have been able to do it over a long period of time, but the competition's structured to work against you. But in our case, we understand that our supporters are really hungry for success. But David Barham, from as president, right from the board executive down, have been really clear that this is a reset of our club, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But internally, we're really hungry and we're impatient as well. We want to get this going, but we're accepting that it's going to take some time.
You've only been in the role a short time, but have you got a sense of the talent you've got at your disposal yet or not?
I think there's a lot of capability. I've never really been one for looking at, we've got early draft picks or we've got first round picks. I mean, ultimately, once a player's been in the club for over 12 months, where they were taken in the drafts are relevant. I mean, we've got some players here that we took through the mid-season draft and the SSP period, that if I didn't know that, I would have thought they were, top echelon talent on our list. So we've got a lot of young talent who were taken early in the draft, but we've got a lot of talent that were taken in various ways, either through the rookie draft or mid-season draft, etc. So I judge them all the same, regardless of whether they were early picks or not. And what I've seen so far, there's a lot of capability, but there's a lot of work to do to build them up to where they're going to be really good, consistent AFL players. So there are glimpses, but the consistency from them is what we're after.
Has anyone surprised you?
Yeah, a lot of players have surprised me, and probably the most pleasant surprise has been some of the well-established senior players that I've admired from afar for quite a period of time. Quite often when you see them up close, they can disappoint you a little bit because you see all the really good attributes, but you don't see behind the curtain and the things they do on a day-to-day basis. Our leaders, Dyson Heppel, Zach Merritt, Andy McGrath, Dylan Shield, Mason Redman, Jaden Laverty, these guys are as they're really professional players, and there's no secret as to why they're good players. The way they prepare and their appetite for work is really impressive, and I think that makes my job a lot easier, because if I can bring them up to the standards that we're setting and they meet those standards, they'll bring the young players with them.
Are you a traditionalist, or are you open-minded about the captaincy?
Yeah, I'm open-minded. I think generally I prefer to be decisive, but this is not. In terms of leadership, it's a whole of club approach. So we'll take a lot of feedback from our football staff. Clearly, the players will have a big input as to who they feel are in the best position to lead the playing group going forward. Personally, I prefer to be decisive, but it's an all-in approach there. So we'll hopefully have that process. We'll certainly have it wound up before we play our first practice game.
Do you favour one captain, or are you open-minded about how many captains and having co-captains?
In a perfect world, but in a scenario where you have very different styles of leadership that potentially complement each other, I think it can work. And the Swans, for example, have shown that it can work. But yeah, if pushed in one direction, I favour the standalone captain.
Anthony McDonald-Tipungwuti has come back. Your expectations at this early stage? I mean, I saw him running around today. I mean, it looks like he's doing a bit. He looks reasonably fit. Yeah,
well, the number one priority is to have Anthony enjoying his football and enjoying life again. He was in a pretty low place, not so long ago, and my priority was, if he wanted to play football, it was really important from my perspective, and I think for the Essendon Football Club, that he played with Essendon. I think it would have been a bit of a blow for our club to have a player of his standing and stature return to football with another club. So the key priority was to get him back. The second priority is to get him enjoying his footy and enjoying life. And then the third priority is to get him conditioned to play AFL football, which is, again, a bit like us. It's going to take some time. And whether he plays early or it takes him a little bit of time, we'll be patient with that. But one thing is evident: when he gets the footy in his hands, he's as good as he's ever been in that regard. We've just got to get him fit enough to be able to do that over 120 minutes.
What role did you play in getting him back to the club?
Well, I hope a fairly significant one, but the timing was pretty tight. I'd only just been appointed, and one of the first meetings I had with the football department was that Anthony was considering coming back to football. But there was a lot of talk at the time he was going to go and potentially go interstate and play at another club. We moved pretty quickly to talk to him and to assess his fitness. And it wasn't simply get Anthony back at all costs. I mean, he had to show that he was up for the fight, and he was up for the work it was going to take to get him back in AFL condition.
The fans love him, I think, more than any other Essendon player currently. What chance has he got of playing in the first round, do you think, at this stage?
Oh, well, I mean, he's got a good chance. We played some match simulation. He's been involved in all of that. He's had a lot of good continuity through his sessions. It's a bit of the philosophy here that we've structured a training program that suits him. It's not exactly the same as every other player, but that's the same for a whole lot of our players, who we just think individualised programs are better. But when it comes to the main training sessions and the match simulation sessions, Anthony's done all of that. So the big test for him will come whether he can do that over a longer period of time. But if we could shorten quarters down to 8 minutes, he'd definitely play round one.
And Jake Stringer, can I ask you about him as well, his fitness and his status and where he's at now?
Yeah, he had a lot of groin pain towards the end of last year, and everyone knows the influence Jake can have on games in really short periods of time, but he's a strength, power, impactful type athlete, and it's very difficult to do that when you're sore. And so he played sore a lot last year, so our priority has been to strip things back for Jake and build up his strength in all the right areas so that he can get back to full power and full strength. And our philosophy's been, if that sets him back a little bit in terms of his conditioning for round one and the early rounds, then we'll live with that. But I want to make sure that when he's playing for us, he's at his powerful best. And so that's been the philosophy with him, and so far so good.
Essendon's been heavily criticised over the last few years because of their lack of defensive pressure and the way they've set up. Has that been a priority for you?
I think it is for every coach. I think there's part of the problem with our game is that you can be really good in one or even two parts of the game, but if you're really deficient in the third, and in Essendon's case, for us that's been our defence. Reasonable around the contest, reasonable offensively, but poor defensively. So, yeah, it's a clear priority for us, but not at the expense of the contest and our offence as well.
Talking about offence, Wright had a great year last season. You got Wiedemann that you recruited to the club. Are you expecting that those two can occupy a key position in the same forward line together?
There's certainly the opportunity for them, and I've watched Sam Wiedemann over a number of years, and I'm impressed with his attributes, and he certainly hasn't disappointed us in displaying those attributes so far in the pre-season. But he has been denied opportunity just through some really good players at his previous club that have been ahead of him. So, I think with an opportunity and with the right, support, he can definitely play alongside Peter Wright. But I'm just so open-minded in terms of what our team looks like, and Harrison Jones has shown really good signs. We've got some really good young key forwards, Baldwin, Voss, these sorts of guys that have impressed through the pre-season. So it's been a pleasant surprise that Wiedemann coming in we thought filled a need, but we have some other options there as well.
Can I ask you a broader question about the game too? And you've had a unique experience now coaching, then going into the administrating side and seeing it from the AFL's perspective and the fans' perspective, and going back into coaching. Do you feel more of a responsibility coming back into the game about the aesthetics and how you want your team to play?
Yeah, I have a much greater awareness of it because coaching, almost by definition, you're very, very single-minded, and you have a narrow focus on what your objectives are. And my responsibility to the Essendon Football Club is to build a world-class football program where players can achieve their potential. And if we do that, we're really confident we can win some games along the way. That's a coach's job, but I have a greater awareness and understanding of how important the look of the game is for the overall health of the game at all levels, not just at AFL level and what we see on TV, but I spent more than 12 months working in community football at AFL Victoria, and there is a huge ecosystem that exists at community level with football, and what happens at the elite level tends to flow down to those community levels, but also to juniors as well. So that the way the game looks is very important, and it's always going to frustrate the fans in the short term. Because one thing I know working at the AFL, all the fans want you to leave the game alone and don't change any rules, except for the rule that they don't like. And everyone's got one. Everyone's got one rule they don't like. So, the AFL's in a no-win position there where they're custodians of the game. They've got to make sure that the game is really compelling to everyone watching it.
As a promise to the Essendon fans, what is it that you hope they see when your side runs out?
Well, what I hope they see is a team that can grow with the supporter base, and the supporter base I think are going to be excited by some of the young players that are going to represent the club. But I also know that they're going to be understanding that it takes some time for those young players to come together, and the facts are we'll have a relatively young and inexperienced team running out most weeks, and we'll have some depth on our list, but it'll be inexperienced depth. So I just hope they see a team that they can grow with and support over a period of time, and that's going to make them proud in the long term, but they accept that it is going to take some time.
Are they catching on quickly to the way you want them to play? I know it's early stages still, but do you think it's going to be like a better second half of the year than the first half, or do you think it'll happen quicker than that?
Oh, I think it always takes some time. We're even at training, we can implement some things and see really good transfer of what we're coaching coming out at training. But an old coach of mine once said, a good plan, needs to survive contact, and that when you play an opposition and they're trying to stop you doing what you're doing, then things become much harder. And so I expect inevitable fluctuations, but I expect to see improvement over time, and we've seen that in the pre-season so far. And my job's made a lot easier by having some really committed leaders, but also a really coachable group.
Just one final question. What's different about Brad Scott coaching Essendon than Brad Scott, his first job coaching North Melbourne, in terms of your personal growth?
Nothing beats experience. I mean, it's the analogy is like a young player. When you're 21, you play 50 games, you think you know it all, and it's not until you're 30 that you realise how ignorant you were as a 21-year-old. When I first came in as a 33-year-old coach, I had some fantastic mentors. I'd been exposed to Lee Matthews for over a decade. I'd been exposed to Mick Moldhouse, who taught me a completely different way of looking at football. And I thought I had a fair bit of experience and was ready. 13 years on, I realised I didn't even know what I didn't know back then. So coming in the second time around, I have a much better understanding of what we need to do in the short term, and there's nowhere near as much guesswork as there was probably 13 years ago.
Do you think you're a better man manager as a result of that too, and those experiences?
No doubt. I think the world of sport is full of examples of that, where coaches come back, and in the States, a lot of coaches are a lot older and a lot more experienced. And if there's anything I'm taking away from my time away from the game, it's that nothing beats experience.